As we have seen many times, artificial intelligence is having a big impact on how things get done around businesses, including how IT groups can buy and acquire new equipment for the businesses. On this episode of Today in Tech, we're going to speak with how much it's disrupting the IT sourcing and procurement process and what customers and companies can expect as agents get deployed. Hi, everybody. Welcome to Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Joining me on the show today in studio is Marcy Maddox. She is the Vice President of Research and Content for IDC's TechBuyer digital platform. Welcome to the show, Marcy.
Thanks.
So it's great having people in the studio, so we enjoy that. So thank you for coming in. So before we get started on the whole AI disruption part of it, can you tell me what are the traditional ways in which IT sourcing and procurement is handled these days in large businesses and enterprises? You know, it feels like I can swap the terms in and out, but it's probably not good in terms of what you do. So how do you define the difference between what IT sourcing is and then what procurement is?
Yeah, so IT sourcing in a nutshell is the ability to find the right solution for the needs of the business. Procurement is how you go about purchasing that particular product. So, in your own life and in your audience, you might have a need. Hey, we want to go get this technology. Well, it has to go through some sort of procurement process where it's a contract. If it's a longer term, maybe it's a desktop application that you have to go and buy. So sourcing is about how do you see the research, map that out to the particular software vendors. If we're going to stay with software sourcing here for a second. Whereas procurement is going beyond. Is the supplier meeting your terms and conditions? Is it finding, as they get all of their invoices in, how they're managing that process? So that's in a nutshell. The traditional means for that, though, is that we have groups. We have groups within finance who are tasked with taking these requirements. Sometimes they're bringing in the business as part of that decision and collaborating. And we do find that 44% of CIOs find sourcing is one of the biggest pains for them because it's a very lengthy process and it's also very resource intensive from a people perspective.
And both of those different processes, both the IT sourcing process and the procurement process, have they been digitized in the last 20 years, or is a lot of it still manual? It feels like IT sourcing, for example, might be like going out and reading a lot of reviews or going and reading articles or talking to your peers, things like that. It doesn't feel like that might not have been as digitized as, maybe the procurement process is. Because I know that they have specific software platforms, right?
They do.
Yeah.
They do. And it has been digitized to some extent, but very much is still very manual. We've seen anywhere from 10 to 12 people who are managing these very paper-intensive processes. And then as you move into digitization, it comes with, and as we'll talk about AI helping you, how do I bring that process into the organization without disrupting how we've done it in the past?
Right.
So there is a change management issue here as well. And even if we think about digital transformation over the past few years, organizations have been pickpocketing where they're going to add this particular technology. And this is an area that has been, in some cases, they are ignored in some ways.
Now, why would they be ignoring it?
Well, I mean, they're not driving the money, right? Okay. They're a cost savings center, and how do we get these contracts to reduce risk?
Yeah,
and if I can, bring in other documents and even have AI look at for commonalities that we can then put in and forecast our spend better, that would be great. But we're back to this idea of I need proof. I need to make sure I can trust it. I can get confidence because it's money that's being spent within the organization.
And so when you look at what generative AI has brought to the table within the last couple of years, because it's now been 2 to 3 years that we're seeing generative AI from its early days, like where do you see it being integrated into both of these processes? Is it still just going after what I call the low-hanging fruit, where it's just, you're looking at repetitive processes that can be automated, and, we just call it AI now, but it used to be called something else. Automate. I think it used to be called either IT automation, or there was another, like, robotic process automation was another.
Yes.
I was like, now, and then one is like, no one, we don't want to talk about that anymore, but it's But now AI, hey,
has a new term.
yeah.
So-
Or are you, like where are most companies at? Are they still at that beginner level, the pilot project level, or are you seeing more larger projects being deployed?
Both.
Yeah.
It is still very cost savings, operational, the whole low hanging fruit from a productivity perspective. That is still the highest. We see about 56% of organizations looking at productivity. When Gen AI is also, when it was rolled out a few years ago with this new term, it was either cost savings and operations, it was driving customer engagement better, which then drives to profit and operations, driving revenue, new revenue streams. And as Gen AI starts to bring efficiencies into the organization, what it's really good at, and I'm sure you've talked about this on your podcast before, is data analysis. The more data I have and the more I can feed it, the more I can identify opportunities. And it's good at that, but you also need the expertise from those people who may be dealing with contracts all the time to say, oh yeah, that particular term or condition, I want to carry through every contract because it's either in my favor or it's a good balance with our suppliers. And so Gen AI, it's still, because this organization with sourcing and procurement and finance hasn't moved forward with AI as much as maybe the call center and customer service have. They are looking at, first, do I have my data in order and organized in a way to even feed the AI as it comes in? And it is an addition from the machine learning and the original versions of AI to now looking at Gen AI to generate contracts that have those risks assigned. But before we can even get there, we have to even understand from a sourcing perspective, who are the vendors we want to deal with? We have maybe a whole slew that we have within the organization today. Where is that going next?
Right. And I think you've answered about 3 other questions that I had here, but I wanted to see what examples you've seen out in the field of some examples of how generative AI has been integrated, because I think, you could talk about big concepts all the time, until your face turns blue. But I think for a lot of people that are working this stuff day to day, they need to see, how is this going to solve my particular problem? So there were some, I think IDC wrote a white paper or an example, and they had 3 cool examples. So one was from McKinsey. What they did is that they took 10,000 RFPs, and then an engine was used to analyze it. And you can probably explain this better than I. So talk about what McKinsey did.
Yeah, McKinsey took 10,000 RFPs and analyzed them to bring a streamline to the bid assessment.
Okay.
So how do I put a bid out? And in that case, you are identifying a particular source that you want to acquire, some sort of technology. It can leverage those 10,000 and say, here's a specific contract that you can put together for the bid, and then they can come back. Deloitte did something similar, not from an analysis perspective, but they looked at across the entire source to cycle part and used AI, Gen AI, to develop that process and refine it. The third example is around retailers and how do you use AI for suppliers. So in this case, we've seen someone like Walmart come in and say, well, we have thousands of suppliers and we want to do this at scale. And so here's how we automate that process to make it repetitive and find a balance between what's good for Walmart and what's good for the supplier, and move forward there. So it is about generating contracts. So content creation is the example. The second is on process automation and process refinement, so streamlining that, because the whole reason why you want to bring Gen AI in is because we want to reduce the amount of time it takes to get to purchase.
Right.
Because you have someone in the organization who says, well, I needed this yesterday. Why does it take 6 months to buy a piece of software?
Yeah.
Well, because there's a lot of legality to it. We want to make sure that everything is set up within our systems. And if you have all these manual paper processes that are very time consuming, we've seen on average 6 months to get $100,000 business application. And you're struggling with the consumer side was, well, I can just go get it off the web tomorrow.
Or an employee that goes rogue, for example, and starts buying software as a service, or they just buy the app with their own credit card and expense it, right?
Yeah. And then you have the whole shadow IT come into play, and there's an oversight. If you are a regulated industry, no, that's not great. That you don't have those T's and C's covered. So those are the examples that we've pulled out. And I've talked to other organizations, and they're looking at it also from a top level, not just sourcing, but how do I bring the vendors and understand my technical architecture? What is my ecosystem? Who is in here? And as we even see in this macroeconomic environment that we're in, a lot of consolidation for acquisitions that come in, bring extra technology. We need to reduce that cost.
Right.
And so this is one way to take a bird's eye view of everything and then say, I'm going to feed you all the information I have about these vendors, and then you come back with a recommendation on which is going to be the best fit for me today and to take me into tomorrow. It
feels like a lot of the examples that we're talking about here are for AI that can do this stuff that a regular human would take. Like, again, it would take a long time for a person to do all of that analysis. Like, again, if looking at 10,000 RFPs, it's like, how do you want to look at one, to be honest? So you get to that point and it's doing that heavy lifting. But the thing that I think concerns me and possibly concerns people that are in this space is it's not you don't want it to necessarily make the decision for you, right? You still want to be able to have a human decision-making part, right? Is that what you're being told too from the decision makers, or from the procurement side, or the IT sourcing?
There are some decisions it can make that are not going to drive additional risk.
Okay.
So for example, if I want to do translation, you could have the system make a decision. I'm looking at this data, and this particular contract is written in French. So go ahead and make the decision to do the translation.
Okay.
And you don't need a human to say, yes, that is French, right? Because it has some understanding. When you want to make a business decision in how this information is going to drive a $100,000 procurement process, then no, it is a collaborative effort. And that's where we're starting to see AI, and as we move into agents, becoming this AI human coordination between them. Have it start with a trial, generate a contract that is a draft, have your legal team review it. And it becomes a review process instead of a whole create from cloth process in terms of how that contract's being generated.
Right. So is the CIO typically the person that's in charge of like that? Is it that group that does all this, or is this more in the finance department that you see a lot of this stuff happening?
Depends on the size of the company.
Yeah.
Larger organizations are going to have whole procurement teams, sourcing teams, finance teams to look at this.
Yeah.
More mid-market companies, it's going to fall to IT. And IT is the largest buyer of technology.
Right.
Because either they are doing the oversight, they might have the budget, or as you mentioned earlier, I have my credit card, and some of the departments might have it. But ultimately, IT is not only looking at it from the purchase perspective, but how does it fit within my environment?
Right. And so when they're looking at a lot of the vendors in the space, do you see this, the whole story, the buy or build type of story? Like, with AI, are they looking at external vendors or consultants to bring in this integration, or is there enough bandwidth and brain power at most of these companies to do it themselves? Like, I don't know. It feels like this. No matter what technology you talk about, that is one of the biggest decisions that they have to make.
There is a build buy partner decision that is coming about. It does require additional research. In fact, we were talking to one CIO, and he was talking about how this process of sourcing technology software is a balancing act between the functionality that I need and the price that I'm going to pay.
Yeah.
And the worst thing is that you go out, and my colleague, Giorgio Noboli, he posted on LinkedIn this story that he says, I don't want to go through and do a test drive of a Lamborghini when I have a budget for a smart car. Because you've now set this expectation of, I love this. I see all the bells and whistles. I want to bring it in. But then you go to buy it and you don't have the budget. Or on the flip side, I don't know how much it's going to cost. And I try to ask the vendors, well, the vendors don't want to necessarily tell you what their price is. Unlike the consumer world where you can go, and let's take a car example. I can go online, I can configure the car, I can get a price, I know exactly what I'm getting. In technology for enterprise software, the more complex it is, the less you're going to see on the pricing side. So this becomes a difficulty. And that research, you asked, do they have teams to do that? They want the information. They want these commercial insights to help make that decision, but they don't have the time or the resources to do that. And so they do use consultants a lot to help them just gather the information, make that recommendation of, here's your sourcing vendors. Now, once you get the sourced list, that short list, I now have to go out to RFP. You asked this earlier question about how do traditional bigger companies deal with this. There is a process.
Yeah.
You'll go through the sourcing research, you'll do the RFP, you'll go see a demo, you'll put the contract negotiation together, and then you go and implement, right? That's a very standard process. How do we reduce that in time?
And do you see AI being used in all parts of that process? So that, like, again, maybe we won't need consultants at some point because you'll have AI doing it for all that stuff for you. I joke because, consultants. Yeah. Okay. They get a lot of money for doing that, but do you see that happening? And then on the other parts, obviously the RFP stuff is being automated.
I mean, the consultants are bringing expertise.
Yeah.
Right. They've been doing it for a while, and it's in their best interest to stay up on the new technologies and what's happening. And do we see AI across the board? Yes. Because as we said earlier, it's how do I create this information whole cloth and let AI do most of that menial work.
Right.
And allow that procurement person to focus on the relationship, the thing that the AI can't do with that particular supplier. So it can happen across the board. We see AI helping in the creation, the dissemination, and the gathering of information, and then turning it over and having that human in the loop as they move forward.
Right. I want to get to the how the actual professionals are feeling about that. I want to get that as my next question, but I want to do one little sidetrack because there was something interesting in the paper that IDC wrote about that there's this thing called the cobbler's children effect, where business leaders are asking IT to develop AI for their parts of the business, and then ignoring it for the stuff that IT needs to do. So are you seeing that as well in where our CIOs under pressure to, hey, they're like, I could use AI for all of the processes within my own IT department, but at the meantime, I've got 30 requests coming in from all of the other parts of the business. Are you seeing this pressure?
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, who's paying for it? So in this case, if IT has the budget and they can be that prototype for everyone else and show how it can be done.
Yeah.
But most of the time, they are not the ones that have the budget and the immediate need to those 30, 40 different departments.
I think it always goes to whoever can drive the most revenue.
Who drives the revenue? Exactly. And it could also be part of cost savings as well. And that's where we want to look at the sourcing and procurement side. Because they're not revenue generators. They are, in a sense, looking at new opportunities.
Yeah.
But it goes back to your question about build versus buy. If you are a standard process, you could just take out of the box AI and develop it. And that could be, ServiceNow or Microsoft or whatever you have, adding on a module.
Yeah.
And you immediately get access to this information. But for many organizations, especially those that have custom processes that they're already building their own technology, they're likely to also build their own AI, take a model and build off of that. So going to your question about the cobbler's children, then that level of effort to develop, integrate, test is very costly. But unless you have a precedent within the rest of the organization to do that, you're likely to just take an AI enabled technology, which a lot of them are coming out. I mean, we just saw ServiceNow and just did an acquisition to add more to their AI. Many of these organizations are putting that into place so that you can turn it on. Because if they don't, they're going to be out of business eventually as well.
So if a CIO was asking you, like, what should we do, or do you maybe start with the IT group just to see that it can be done, and or maybe tackle one of the other ones first, and then get to the IT stuff later? I don't know. I guess it all depends on the final outcome that you want, right?
I mean, it does depend because if it's a business case decision. So if marketing or support or somebody else says, I can drive X $1 million additional revenue by doing this, they're going to probably get top priority.
Right.
When you're talking about finance and sourcing and procurement, they're not going to be the ones to be top of the list.
Right.
Normally.
And even the idea of saving money is never as exciting as making more money.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
Even though it could be the same amount of, like, it's like, I could make $2 million. Well, I could save $2 million. Like, well, let's go make the $2 million.
Right. So in that case, so IT could be that beginning example, and then you could roll it out across all the other departments.
Yeah. Okay, I want to get back to the question then of the professionals that are in the space. What's their anxiety level around a lot of the AI? Are they concerned that if a lot of this processes get automated, that they might not have as much of a fun of a job? I guess I don't know. I don't know how fun the IT sourcing procurement job is. It seems kind of dry, but that's okay. Yeah. Are they concerned, or are they looking at it like a lot of other professionals are? In that, okay, I can use this to augment my job and make me better and make me faster, make me more productive, whatever the reason is.
Yeah. So for this, the challenge is that they are overwhelmed with work. And this is a way for them. Yes, it could take away their job if that's all they did was mundane, routine tasks. But for the most part, they cannot get all the work done in a day. And so if you could have an agent or some level of AI embedded in to do more of their work, in fact, we've seen 40% improvement in just handling administrative tasks, which frees up about 30% more on dealing with the higher stakes, the relationships, the strategy and process that you maybe never had time to get to.
Yeah.
You need to do it, but you still are in the weeds every day doing this mundane work. That's the free up. And yes, so there are going to be, and it's been around for a while and probably will stay for a while, AI is going to take my job.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you want it to. You need to have a different perspective that it's here to aid you, not, we're not like the movies where you see it completely go off the rails.
Right.
At least yet. But but now, you have an opportunity to use it in context of my jobs to be done.
Yeah.
And once you lay that out and put it into those steps that I described earlier, you'll see the advantage.
Yeah.
And you have to
again,
trust.
if you can we talked about this at the beginning of the show, if you could get to a process that was 6 months and get it down to 3 months, you're making a lot of other people happy.
Yeah.
And you're also reducing the risk of someone going rogue and trying, the immediate effect type of thing. As long as it's benefiting the company and benefiting, everybody at the company, it should be something that
and that's
you
where
should strive for, right?
Exactly. And then IT and finance don't become that bottleneck. They become the heroes within the organization.
And we throw them a party and we give them some pizza.
Yeah, give them something, give them something to help them grow, But it is change. And in fact, here's another little story, talking to a colleague of mine. And he went to visit the company and he noticed that the person was using a wired mouse and the wire was going down. And he looked and he said, you're using your mouse upside down. And he says, this is how I learned. I learned it this way. And so now in his brain, he knows up and down and left and right or backward from but he couldn't change.
Wow.
And he just said, no, I'm just going to use the way I have. That's the level of change we're talking about. So when we bring in AI and you're going to say, hey, you have this great opportunity to make your life better, you cannot do it the way you were doing it before. You have to change. And that change is going to be a lot harder for someone who has entrenched themselves versus someone who may be new out of college and quick to pick it up. And they're going to say, oh yeah, I use AI all the time in school. Now I'm going to bring it to the business and show you that level of efficiency, maybe some additional things we can do in terms of getting rid of RFPs.
Yeah.
That sort of thing.
So that just reminds me of a story that whenever a new technology was brought into our workplace, again, we all started with email and we still have email. Everyone still uses email. But then, Slack came around and there were all these other new tools that came about. And I remember there was a couple of older editors that would be like, I just don't feel like using, again, every time they bring in a new platform, I'm still dealing with it because I think someone wants to bring in Monday to do project management. I'm like, listen, I know my spreadsheet. I know, my brain is functioned to that spreadsheet mentality. It's like, well, And just learning another platform doesn't mean that spreadsheets are going to go away. It just means another platform. And that's what a lot of business software is at these days. It feels like, you still, now instead of just email, you've got Slack, you've got text messages, you've got all these new layers that are supposed to make us more productive, but they end up not. I'm wondering if the procurement side of things too, like they're like, well, is this going to integrate into my existing process, or is this going to just add another layer on top? And that's where I'd be worried.
Key word there is integration. You have to integrate into the systems I already have, and you have to be able to handle the systems I don't have today. And if those technologies, especially something like Gen AI that can generate, vendor recommendations and help my sourcing, you're not competing against an email that you've had forever.
Yeah.
You're dealing with me having to read 10,000 RFPs. You have an easier time of adoption. It's when you already have something entrenched, then you have to integrate to everything that's in there because nothing goes away. More things get added, as we know in our lives.
I know. We've got enough of a history of knowing that you never get rid of that mainframe, or you never get rid of that PC. It's still, sometimes you get a new one, but for a lot of the processes, like again, when did we start using email? Like 30 years ago? Yeah,
way back when.
And I still have to answer my emails. And it's weird. I have friends that have the emails that are unread, and there's like 50 of them. I was like, I can't do that. I have to answer or just delete all of these emails.
Maybe typewriters. Yeah. Maybe that's one thing we'll get.
True. I do not use it, but there are people that love typewriters too, and they love that clickety clack. I have a keyboard that does that makes that sound just because.
The ching.
Yeah. All right, let's move on to the next big phase, which is going to be AI agents or agentic AI. I still haven't figured out which term I liked more or less. But are you also seeing that creep into the conversation here with procurement and IT sourcing?
It's early days. Yeah. It's very early. A lot of that is being tested now. We had this idea, you mentioned robotic process automation, where you have this ability for a system to run with rules. It was acting on its own, but it wasn't completely available. The thing that we start to see, especially with the cloud and agents coming on, is the marketplace. So how do I go and get an agent that already does, let's say, translation, and brings that in? Very easy. How do I bring an agent that can do sourcing, looking at tons of research? IDC has thousands of papers on particular topics.
Yeah.
How does that come into play? Because I don't have to build it. I don't have to have my IT team go and create that workflow, put that process automation in, et cetera. You could just invoke that agent. We have to first, in sourcing and procurement and in finance and accounting in general, have to get over that hump of understanding what AI is before we can start to adopt it in. And it reminds me of a different story is the cargo cult idea.
Yep.
And if you're familiar with this, back in World War II, we were dropping cargo. As soon as the war ended, the cargo stopped being delivered. And the islanders said, oh, well, if we build a airport, we'll start getting cargo again. Well, what that comes down to is the situations where people are blindly imitating something because they want a particular outcome without understanding how that process worked, how that outcome came to be.
Right.
And so if we think about that from agents, are we going to blindly start to accept that these agents are going to do the work for us without completely understanding the elements that go into it?
Right.
And that's, again, another change agent. And we have an opportunity within this particular area, because that digital transformation hasn't happened yet, to educate them. Yes, there will be agents that could do sourcing. It could do also RFP generation. It can also look at those bids that come in and analyze them and make a recommendation based on those different aspects. And it brings a readiness to the organization. But it's a little early days for this particular group.
And it feels like because there's so many different steps that you still want to have a lot of review and analysis that still needs to have a human touch to it before you get into you're not going to just say, all right, buy me 50 computers and then go and then have it go through that whole process. Like you're going to be like, all right, which ones do we want? What, for who, which people, and you're going to contracts and finance and legal and all that other stuff.
You'll at least want some milestones to check before it gets there.
Whereas when we see it in the consumer side of things, it's more about an agent, multiple agents or an agent doing multiple tasks. It's more like, hey, I want to go to Florida in March or in April. And then the agent goes and finds the flights and then finds a hotel and then books this and then does this and says, okay, well, here's the flights, or picks the flights for you.
But even in that example,
yeah.
you still have to give it the parameters.
Right. Or it's supposed to know, it's supposed to know those parameters based on my data.
Your
and my
history.
past history.
Yeah, exactly. But you have to have that history and open it up. And that leads to trust.
Yeah.
Having trust and expertise and confidence that if I give it the permission to go do that task, I'm willing to take the risk of, oh, you just booked me a first class ticket for $50. Great. 5,000, maybe not so much.
Yeah. Because it needs to know the policies.
It needs to know policies.
Yeah.
It needs to know everything that are your particular interests. And that leads to personalization.
Right.
Huge. I mean, we've been dealing with trying to get personalization. Tell me my recommendations, my needs, not some generic need. Going back to the McKinsey example, taking my RFPs and then building a contract that meets my business uniqueness versus, we can put general templates together, but it's how do I bring in my direct, because every business is different, my direct needs, and then drive that recommendation in a confidence way. Because so far, AI has not been transparent in how it arrived at its decision and the confidence level that it has. In fact, we're even doing testing with some AI to say, how did you arrive at that example? And it says, oh, actually, I'm not sure. I'm going to restate that, right? And when you push it to say, show me this information, it will redo its analysis to drive a different recommendation.
Yeah, I got to start asking my AI stuff that, like, how did you come at that decision? And they're like, well, I don't, it's funny because an AI will never want to say, I don't know, or I just made it up, or I just guessed. Like, okay. Whereas humans can do that, right? Like humans can do all that stuff. But yeah, I think that the issue of trust is huge still, and explainability. But do you, with the personalization stuff, do you think that that's the holy grail then for AI in this space where, personalization, and if it can work, then that's amazing if that happens, right?
Personalization and accuracy.
Okay.
I think the two of those together will bring a level of adoption. I mean, we're already seeing, CIOs are saying on the order of 72, 75% say, I see the potential in the next 3 to 5 years for agents to do some more work.
Yeah.
But I have to trust, because a lot of organizations, especially finance teams, they have to deal with data privacy. They have to deal with all these regulations. They can't just turn that over to an agent without some verification that the steps that it went through were going to be, if they were ever audited, that particular task is going to be, meet the sniff test.
Right. So another thing that we talked about before the show was the idea of data. Do you feel that a lot of companies have that data available, or are they still in the process of digitally transforming? And I hate using that term, but getting the data from a manual process into a digital process. Because again, you want to avoid that whole garbage in, garbage out scenario, right? With, you can't just give AI horrible data because you're going to get horrible results. Do they feel confident enough with the data that people have right now to move forward?
No.
Oh,
I mean,
wow. Okay.
Honestly, it's still very manual, a lot of paper. And this is one area, yes, we've seen data transformation happening for the last 10, 15 years.
Yeah.
As we move into, especially as the cloud forced you to have to put stuff into a more organized, structured way.
Yeah.
In this particular area, because a lot of it is contracts, it's bill of ladles, et cetera, that you have to use old technology like OCR, optical character recognition, to pull out that information, then turn it into something that's structured. A lot of organizations are still looking to implement that technology.
They're still not even there at that point.
They're not even there
Wow.
at that point.
Okay.
And it reminds me of mobile technology. In third world countries that didn't have landlines, they skipped over that entirely and went straight to mobile.
Right.
This is an opportunity for sourcing and procurement teams to jump over OCR and get AI to do that same level of analysis.
Yep.
Might be using some version of OCR to take that structured data, to then be able to feed it into those tens of thousands of RFPs that can
Right.
be rationalized. But it's all back to, are they willing, go back to Cobbler's Children in IT, see proof in it being used and then adopt it into their own. Because the worst thing is I go in and get a contract and get it signed and then find out, oh, that was the wrong decision.
Right. Yeah, you don't want to make that mistake. Yeah. So are there any other things that might be disrupted in this space? I think, when we talked before the show, we talked about licensing models may change. We talked about the entire infrastructure may change, have to change to support all this. Like that could terrify me if someone came up to me and said, oh yeah, but everything that we've been doing for the last 10 years, we have to change the infrastructure. Like that seems frightening.
Yeah, I think there's 4 different areas that are going to be disrupted.
Yeah.
First is in the technology ecosystem. The entire infrastructure that we have today, we're not going to get rid of the mainframes, as you said earlier.
Right.
We have to weave them in
Yeah.
to this process. But it comes back to integration. It comes down to rationalization of, I have 15 ERPs. How do I move down to 1? What's the cost of that? And where is it going to take me next? Is it already AI enabled? If it's not, do I need to consider maybe an emerging vendor that can come in and do that, plug it in? The risk there is that emerging vendor might be acquired by a different company, and how do I deal with that? So yes, we have to look at the architecture, the integrations that come into all of my data. All these data sources come from many different external and internal. The second is these emerging vendors is another disruption because it's so, in fact, I just heard the other day, someone says, oh, we're an AI tool and we've been around forever. When did you start? 2016. 2016. Okay.
Yeah.
No.
Forever. Boy.
When you're dealing with 5-year turnaround,
Yeah.
it does seem forever. But, getting this technology into a state where we see 3 things: experience, trust, and confidence. And if they have that, putting those systems into place and then augmenting it with your architecture and your infrastructure. The third is the security around it. How do we ensure that all of the risk that we're putting into the system is not coming back out in terms of dollars?
Right.
We don't want to lose any money. We
Right.
want to make progress. So here we see security, not only from the cybersecurity side, but even on the risk for those contracts. Are those the right terms and conditions? Can we reduce that risk? AI can help you to do that. But it is a change management. It's turning your mouse upside down.
Are the risks and the hurdles so high that a company might just say, we're not ready for it yet, or we'll just slow it down? Or is there, because there's a lot of external pressure too for get this done. And then even if you're ready to go, the technology changes so fast too. I mean, we've seen how many different LLM models in the 3 years just alone. And then, there's like 20 new companies every month that come out with stuff.
What's interesting that's driving some of that, right after Gen AI came out, and later into 2023, we started to see boards put a demand on the organization to show you've adopted 10%, 15% of your work is driven by AI. And we're driving the inclusion of AI into the organization. That's backed off some. And now it's becoming more of a TCO and an ROI decision of, if we're going to bring it in, show me how it's going to drive revenue, it's going to drive cost savings, or it's going to drive change in innovation to our business. And that's where those licensing models that you mentioned earlier are changing. Where before we had license and maintenance, think old school.
Yep.
Then we moved to the cloud. We saw subscription.
Yep.
Or by subscription. Now we're just now getting used to this idea of tokens and consumption, and how do we deal with this new situation. So I'm not buying based on how many users do I have in the system, but how much are we using? How often are we calling the AI? What kind of computational demand is it for the cloud? And if you're not an organization that's already moved to the cloud, this is not where to start with
Right.
this. You do have to come up, and it is going to change pricing. It's going to change how it's sold.
Do you think subscriptions will then go away for a lot of this stuff as we
No,
move towards the token?
It'll be augmented.
Okay. Because I think that would be a big fear too. It's like, well, now I'm spending a lot more and I don't want to spend a lot more. The idea is to spend less. Yeah. Yeah. Great stuff, Marcy. Again, thanks for joining us in the studio here, talking about this. You got some other stuff coming out that we can't really talk about yet because we're going to have another episode of demo where you're going to show that off. But it is the IDC Tech Match platform, correct?
Correct.
Yeah.
IDC Tech Match is our using IDC proprietary research information will help this sourcing process we talked about based on an AI-driven search and delivery model. So we're excited about it and glad to show it to you.
All right,
later.
so check that out on demo, coming soon to another video platform near you. Thanks again, Marcy.
Thanks.
That's going to do it for this week's show. Be sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, add any thoughts you have below. Join us every week for new episodes of Today in Tech. I'm Keith Shaw. Thanks for watching.